Time to bring in the power panel. In Washington already, where all the action is, lucky Amanda Alvaro, Pomp and Circumstance. With that title, I think we ought to have trumpets when we introduce it.
I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, you take it. Here with me in the studio, Tim Powers of Summa Strategies, Media Styles Ian Capstick, and Le Devoir's Marie Vestel. Amanda, since you're our Washington authority for the day, I'll start with you. You heard what John Kerry said. It seems like whether it's being polite about the pulling out of the CF-18s or not, the Americans are now basically undercutting the Conservative opposition here, that was a disaster. He's saying we're not pulling out, we're stepping up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he could have been any more clear. And while we all listen with intent every time Mr. Tim Powers speak, I do think that it's going to fall a little on deaf ears today, the criticism, because we have John Kerry. He was effusive, actually, when he talked about Canada's contribution against the fight against ISIS. He talked about the training. He talked about amplifying, augmenting the efforts. He talked about Canada being one of the first countries to step up, being part of the coalition. He really talked about Canada in a leadership role, making all the right moves and all the right steps. Part of it was tonal as well, and you're right, we're going to talk a lot about the fact that this is the first time that the Prime Minister's been at the state dinner in 19 years. There's a tone in Washington, and that tone is really about cooperation, acceptance, moving forward together, and you're hearing it when you listen to John Kerry speak, even when he talks about things like the fight against ISIS. He's referring to Canada in what can only be described as a positive light in this fight, and talking about Canada and the role that Canada is playing as being a massive contribution.
Tim Powers, I'm sure you agree that everything's going perfectly and that Canada's role has been completely endorsed by the Americans.
It's sunny days, sunny ways, apparently all across the continent. Look, in fairness, it doesn't hurt the Liberals that John Kerry's said that. But again, to your point, what would you expect him to say? He's not going to welcome the Prime Minister by telling him he's not very happy with what they're doing in ISIS, because they have an ask, too, the Americans do with Canada, and that is on TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's an important legacy piece for the Americans right now. I think Barack Obama would like to get warmer enthusiasm from Justin Trudeau on the TPP. While the Liberals have signed this version, they've been cautious, I think is a fair way of describing it. So, look, I agree with Amanda. It's a positive tone, and that's a good thing, because the Liberals have inflated the expectations for these visits to the high heavens. You would swear no Prime Minister ever had been to Washington. But the reality is, whether it's John Kerry or Barack Obama, these guys are gone in 7 months. So this will be a short-term success for the Liberals, but it really doesn't matter what Kerry or Obama says right now. It's who's next and how that relationship is going to work in the next number of years.
I guess, Marie, you can come in on this. It kind of still matters if it's another Democratic administration, and there's not a... If it's President Trump, it's a whole other question, isn't it?
I don't even want to begin to contemplate that question, Terry. But, I mean, if it is Hillary Clinton, it is in some ways a good continuity, but I don't think that means that she would agree with everything her predecessor has done. But to that point, I don't think everything will have to be started over, because there are high bureaucrats that the government is going to meet. There are secretaries, other than Secretary Kerry, that they're going to meet. There are congressmen or congresswomen that they are going to meet that'll still be there afterwards.
The secretaries won't be there.
But the congresswomen, the congressmen, the senators, there's still relationships that they can start building. And I mean, yes, they're leaving in 6 months, but I'm sure they're quite happy with the press they're getting this week. But to go back to Secretary Kerry, I'm not sure what else he could have said. Not only has this been announced for a long time, and he wasn't going to bash on Justin Trudeau as he is on the plane on the way over there, but also the planes have already gone. They didn't have a big contribution. They've been gone. We learned, as a little side note, during the debate a few weeks ago. And so what are they going to say? They have to they have to salute the contribution that we're doing now.
So, Ian, do you agree that the Liberals have kind of aced this one? They've pulled it off.
It hasn't started.
Everyone's praising them for stepping
Indeed,
up.
Literally, the plane has just landed. The trip is already a success because, quite frankly, they have created a narrative that is going to be a successful narrative. They haven't, in advance of this, said expect massive announcements, expect a major change. Right. But instead, what they've done very successfully, quite frankly, is they have articulated and meted out a series of perhaps exclusives and columns about how badly the U.S. ambassador was treated here in Ottawa by the previous government. And these types of articles and things have started to pop up a couple weeks ago. Yeah. And they started to inform the dialogue, which we are now all finding ourselves in the midst of, which is to suggest this is the best thing in humanity in the course of North American relations. There has nothing ever been anything as significant as this particular event, because that's the narrative they want us having the conversation on. Now, what will be very interesting is when the rubber hits the road weeks from now, when Ambassador McNaughton actually has more than 10 days on the job, right. When he is a month in, 2 months in, do we still see individuals saying, well, we don't really think that we need another pipeline, for instance, from Canada to the United States, which is a very difficult and dangerous thing to be suggesting, because you can't control Canadian oil companies and extractive companies. They may, in fact, want to go back at something like that, and under a different regime, it might be a lot more reasonable. So
Kerry
what's
was
happening?
A bit cool to that pipeline idea.
Very cool to that idea,
in his
right?
interview with Rosie Barton.
And I think that, so Amanda's name of her firm has got this exactly right. This next couple of days is all about pomp and circumstance, which is why my firm put out some Snapchat geofilters today, so that the selfie prime minister and the tech president can get in there on the geofilters on Snapchat and make a big deal of it. Because really, let's face it, this is not about public policy.
I don't think that's
about good photo ops.
I don't think that's entirely true. I think they do have some serious policies and accords to discuss, softwood lumber being one of them, TPP, as Tim mentioned, being another one.
Though. It's
environment.
About the photo ops.
Yeah, but I still think they're going to be asked questions about it, and I don't think they can just come back with a nice picture at the state dinner. I don't think that's true. And I think people do have expectations about what's going to be discussed, and I don't think it's going to be that fun for Justin Trudeau. He has a lot of things to push forward in those meetings.
He certainly does. Amanda, you were trying to get in there.
Well, I mean, it's a pretty cynical panel today, but listen, I think
it's cold and rainy here. You're in a city that's sunny and warm.
20 degrees.
Fair enough. But let's take it for what it is. There is an optics side of it, but why for once can't we be grateful for the kind of optics and the PR that this is giving Canada? There's nothing but positive announcements, energy, the stories that are coming out about this visit, about this official visit, and about the state dinner. It's all good, and it's all good for Canada.
All good
then there's the more serious policy focused side. Bilateral discussions that are happening tomorrow on topics that we know will include things like border security, trade, climate change. We also know that Ms. Sophie Trudeau is going to be out with Michelle Obama. They're going to be putting a lens on the Let Girls Learn initiative. These are important undertakings that happen in and around what all of the hoop and all of the hoopla has been about, which is the state dinner. But I think it's only fair to suggest that there are
rain on the parade a little
number of very good things underway.
Let Tim just have one little quick rain on your parade.
Cumulus cloud hanging over here with a little bit of rain. Look, sure, Canadians like this. They do like a prime minister that they think is well welcomed in the U.S. and fawned over in the U.S. We have that Canadian thing. We welcome that. But, this state visit doesn't necessarily today or tomorrow change the state of people's pocketbooks and the own peril and strife that they talk about. Ambassador McNaughton, Amanda referenced it a moment ago, and others have talked about, the fight over Keystone, where there's a lot of people in my province, in Alberta and elsewhere, who couldn't care less about the state visit, but do want to know there's some commitment to their resources and their engagement. They're not going to be super happy about all of this. And I think the Prime Minister's skill, and I think you underestimate him at his peril, is challenging his strength, which is his ability to connect with all sorts of people. But again, I think his danger here is the expectations are so very high. And I go back to this date stamp here. In 7 months, he's got to do this all over again. He'll get lots of plaudits right now, but we're going to have to judge him on outcomes a year or 2 or 3 years from now.
If we get time, we might play the clip of John Kerry proving you wrong, saying, we're not lame ducks, we're still...
What did Donald Trump say about that guy, Kerry? No, it was Mitt Romney who was the joke artist.
We did Trump on the show already. So. Welcome back to Power and Politics. In the Power Panel, Amanda, Tim, Ian and Marie kicking around this Washington visit. I want to move on to the delicate topic of the border, where we always seem to have agreements which never really happen. It seems to me, didn't we have one of these 5 years ago?
That's what I was just wondering.
And there was beyond the border, and everything was going to be fixed, and we were going to have security cooperation, economic cooperation, harmonization of regulations, pages of this stuff. Ian, let me start with you. What's the point in getting on the edge of our seats, waiting for this new agreement, if it suffers the same fate?
I will be only ever so more slightly optimistic than you have been, Terry, because I have actually seen some movement on the border. If you take a look at programs like Nexus and Global Entry, the world is getting a little bit more organized here, and we do at least now have a framework and an infrastructure in place to be able to ease these types of border tensions. The border issue, the border security issue, though, that concerns me the most, and I don't think it'll be dealt with, quite frankly, this week, is guns. Guns coming across the border from the United States into major Canadian urban centers as well as other areas. And unfortunately, we've had to arm our guards because of this very large influx of illegal weaponry coming in across that particular border. And as we look to ease economic bureaucracy attached to importing within Canada, particularly vis-a-vis land border crossings, we're going to want to make absolutely certain that there is an auditing procedure in place, that there is random checks in place, so that any of these pre-cleared goods, in fact, do still have a chance at getting checked. Because we've seen in a variety of different other scenarios with these sort of transnational and incredibly porous borders, that the first thing that starts to make the trip across those now newly porous borders is, in fact, things that are of a nature of vice. So we're talking drugs, prostitution, and a variety of other things. So what concerns me here is that we're not actually dealing with the real issue, because nobody really wants to deal with the elephant in the room, which is the crime that occurs on the world's longest undefended border.
Instead of which we spend a lot of time talking about getting trucks moving across the border faster. Marie, do you think that this is going to be different? Are you an optimist or a pessimist? We'll have an agreement, a vision, but no detail.
I mean, I'm still waiting on the details from the last one. I thought the same thing you did. Didn't we have this in 2011 with Mr. Harper and Mr. Obama? And we're also talking about more information sharing this time around, more information about exits from Canada. But that was discussed the last time, and then we were supposed to get guarantees a little later. They were supposed to be coming on how that information would be protected.
I think we're in phase 2 of 4.
But I didn't get those guarantees. I don't know if you did. And so we're already supposed to be sharing information. We don't really know how or what's being protected. And now we're expecting even more information to be shared without really any guidelines or any securities on what's going on with that information. That, to me, also is a little concerning, and so maybe another deal and even less guarantees. I don't know.
But you know what? This is an issue, and we've talked about it, but it adds some more history to it, that has plagued every prime minister since Chrétien, going back to 9/11. I mean, you and I and Ian and others can probably remember Tom Ridge and John Manley standing in Niagara Falls. We're going to make this better. We're going to make this better. And arguably, taking the partisan nature out of it, it's the most important issue for the Canadian Prime Minister with the Americans, because it is what does put money in people's pocketbooks. You have to remember that staggering stat from the NAFTA agreement that $1 billion goes across that border each year. We saw one practical thing done, and credit to the McGuinty Liberals. They played a role in this.
Each day. You said
each day. Sorry, each day. And it's more than that.
2 billion, not 1 billion now.
But, you know, there was the initiative to build a new bridge at Detroit, is
which
important,
we ended up paying
but that's now slowing down. This is the one that doesn't get the glitz and the glamour, but by God, does it ever matter?
Let's give the last word to somebody who actually crossed the border, so maybe you know something about it. Do you think we're going anywhere on this, or just more fluff and announcements?
On this one, I agree with Tim. I think that this will be one of the more important announcements potentially coming out of these meetings. We're talking about, obviously, the longest border shared
maybe
between
we could squeeze in
two countries.
We could squeeze in the Softwood clip.
Sorry? The longest border shared between two countries. And then, of course, you know, we're also talking about what economic impacts this will have. There has been a tremendous amount of tension at the borders. Tension for any commuter, any traveler, any tourist who's looking to cross that border. And we haven't seen numbers of border crossings pre-9/11 numbers. We've been in a steady decline since then. All of the measures that were put in place post 9/11 are preventing the kind of surge across the borders that allows us to increase shopping, to increase tourism, all the things that we desperately need right now. So while it may not be the most glamorous announcement coming out of the next couple of days, I agree with Tim, it may be the most important.
And it matters really to Ontario, more than anybody else now. While the resource-rich provinces are suffering in other ways, the low dollar benefits the manufacturing industry in Ontario. That's why Ontario worked with the Harper government to get that bridge, worked with Michigan to get that going. Kathleen Wynne, who's a strong ally of the Prime Minister, I'm sure is going to want to make sure the best deal possible is rendered here.
But it's not just Ontario. It's places like your home province, which as oil goes down, tourism becomes so much more important.
That's right.
You see those incredible tourism ads from all across Atlantic Canada, and you have to wonder to yourself, can those folks get across the border as efficiently as possible? And the answer in a lot of instances, when you take a look at CBSA tweeting out the wait times on borders, is no. And moreover, it's that cross-border shopping. It's that Vermont-Quebec connection, which you just want that little hop across the border. So the other thing maybe they should look at is increasing the allowable expense limits on both sides of the border.
Flaherty did that.
Flaherty did that, but I'd love to see the Americans come along board and allow maybe them to spend about double.
You've got a pretty long shopping list on the border there. Let me just get one thing on the table. There's another unpopular border issue, softwood lumber. Here we go. It's only been 30 years. We didn't want to rush into anything fixing this. But Rosie Barton, by the way, caught up with Canada's new ambassador, David McNaughton, and asked him about softwood lumber. It doesn't sound like he's talking imminent progress. Take a listen to this.
I would say don't expect anything big. I would also say maybe don't even expect anything small.
I'm sure a lot of people are very reassured.
So doesn't that give you an indication that maybe the cynics among us are correct, that it's not going to be? Marie, you and I both reported on the last go-round on this.
Well, these things are never very exciting agreements anyways. But I mean, but this one is an important one in certain parts of the country, one of them being Quebec. And the thing that I found odd this week is that Minister of Foreign Affairs Stéphane Dion, in one or two interviews, said they were pushing very hard for free trade to apply to softwood, and that they were pushing very hard to get across in Washington that
Yes, so did McNaughton, by the way. He also said the same thing.
Yeah, but apparently it's not really doing anything,
all his time on that since he got there, a week and a half ago.
I mean, one would hope that there is some sort of reassurance that this will at least stay stable until next October, and once the 1 year buffer after the deal is expired, Canadian companies aren't going to get sued all of a sudden.
Last word, Ian, on this, and then I've got to move on.
I think the critical thing with softwood is to start realigning our allies in the United States. We have not gone after traditional allies like people who build affordable housing. Recognize that Canadian softwood, under the current economic circumstances, is an incredible building material. But if we get into another tariffing situation, it's simply not going to get across the border. So those houses are going to inevitably be more expensive. All of this comes down to, though, the strength of the American wood lobby. I mean, these folks are incredibly good at keeping out imports.
Which has proven itself again and again, right?
They certainly have. They're tough.
We have to